Hey, welcome back. I was up all night working this story, and what stopped me wasn't the betrayal, it was the precision of what came after it. The protagonist does not rage, she reads, and in that reading, she finds something her husband spent 3 years hiding. You're watching His Eternal Diary.
The smell reached her first. Not perfume, not the lingering warmth of a heated apartment. It was cold air, the specific, invasive cold that only existed when windows had been left open for hours, or when someone had wanted to make a room feel less like a home and more like a transaction. Shun Yue stood in the doorway of the apartment she had shared with Lin Hao for 4 years, her overnight bag still on her shoulder, her coat still buttoned to the throat. The lights in the entryway were off. She had not touched the switch. She stood in the dark for a moment, breathing in that cold, and something at the base of her skull, something ancient and animal, told her not to move yet. Outside, the city was still finishing its celebration. She could hear it through the half-open window at the end of the corridor. Distant fireworks, the low thrum of crowds, the occasional shriek of something launched too high. It was the second day of the new year. She had spent the first with Jiang Chen at his family's ancestral home in Suzhou, a quiet gathering she had attended under the pretense of a school reunion, which it technically was, though she had known, riding the high-speed rail with her weekend bag, that it was more than that. She did not feel guilty about Jiang Chen. They had not done anything that needed guilt. They had sat on his family's stone porch in the thin January cold and drunk warm rice wine and talked about the people they had been at 22, before life had calcified around them. He had held her hand for approximately 4 minutes near midnight, and she had let him, and when the fireworks cracked open above the old city wall, she had thought, cleanly, without drama, that she had made the wrong choice at 25. But she had come home. She always came home. Dun. The envelope was on the kitchen table. She saw it when she finally found the light switch. Not the entryway one, which she now noticed had been deliberately unscrewed so that the bulb sat loose in its socket, but the kitchen light, which flooded everything in that particular yellow that made every surface look slightly sick. The envelope was manila, legal-sized, and it was not sealed. It sat in the center of the table with the flat authority of something that had been placed, not left. Someone had thought about where to put it. Lin Hao was not in the apartment. She had already known this before she confirmed it. His shoes were not on the rack, his keys were not on the hook, and the cold that had hit her in the doorway was the cold of a space that had not contained a breathing person for at least 6 hours. Shun Yue set down her overnight bag. She unbuttoned her coat, folded it over the back of a kitchen chair, and sat down. She did not reach for the envelope immediately. She looked at it. She looked at the way the light caught its edge, and she thought about the fact that someone, her husband, presumably, or someone he had hired, had taken the time to center it on the table. Not pushed to a corner, not left on the couch. Centered, like a centerpiece, like a formal place setting for a meal she had not been invited to eat. She reached for it. Inside were 47 pages. She knew what they were before she read the first line, because she had read divorce papers before, not her own, but enough of them in the course of her work to recognize the specific typography, the column of legalese that began with the names of the parties and their identification numbers, the date of the marriage, the date the petition had been filed. She noted that date. It had been filed 11 days ago, while she was still in this apartment, while she had been eating dinner across from Lin Hao and asking him whether he wanted to renew their lease. She read every page. She was a corporate attorney. She read things the way other people breathed, automatically, completely, without deciding to. By the time she reached page 47, she had noted 6 things that required immediate attention. And she had catalogued them in her mind with the same quiet efficiency she used when preparing for depositions. She set the papers down. She went to the kitchen and made coffee, using the cheap instant powder she kept in the cabinet above the sign. The kind Lin Hao had always complained about. The kind she had continued to buy because she drank coffee alone most mornings, and she preferred the speed. She drank half the cup standing at the window. Then she went to find her laptop. This is the part that people in her situation were not supposed to do. People in her situation, blindsided, at its tone, coming home from a weekend that already carried its own ambiguous weight, finding papers on a table in a cold apartment, were supposed to call someone. A sister, a best friend, a mother. They were supposed to cry, or sit on the floor, or drink something stronger than instant coffee. They were supposed to feel it first and think later. Shen Yue had tried that once. She had tried it 3 years ago, when the first version of this story played out. And she had called her sister and cried on the floor of this same kitchen and drunk half a bottle of something, and then the next morning she had signed. She had signed because the papers had been designed to make signing feel like the only option. They were designed, and she had understood this even then, even through the fog of whatever she had drunk, to move quickly, to close before she had time to surface and look around and ask the right questions. And she had asked none of the right questions the first time. She had walked away from 4 years of marriage with a settlement that sounded generous. 300,000 yuan. The apartment lease transferred to her name, a car she did not particularly want. She had signed and gone and rebuilt and spent the next 2 years convincing herself that the settlement was fair, that she had gotten what was reasonable, that the speed of it had been a mercy rather than a mechanism. And then, 14 months later, she had been sitting in a conference room in her firm's Beijing office, across from a client whose husband had hidden assets through a network of nominee-held shell companies, and her colleague Fang Rui had pulled up a corporate registry search on the projector screen, and Shen Yue had seen, in the column labeled Registered Representative, a name she recognized. The name was not Lin Hao's. The name was his mother's maiden name, which was not his name. Which was precisely the point. She had sat in that conference room for the rest of the meeting with her face arranged into her professional expression, and when it was over she had gone to her office and closed the door, and spent 4 hours pulling on threads. What she found, she had not immediately known what to do with. The marriage was over. The papers were signed. What she found was a postscript to a story she thought she'd finished reading. What she found was that Lin Hao, in the 18 months before he filed for divorce, had moved approximately 4.7 million yuan out of their marital estate through a series of transfers that were individually unremarkable and that were collectively extraordinarily deliberate. She had thought about that for a long time. She had thought about the apartment she had taken in the settlement, and the car she did not want, and the 300,000 yuan that had sounded generous until she understood that it had been designed to sound generous while representing approximately 6% of what she was actually owed. She had not done anything with that knowledge. She had filed it. She had told herself, in the way that intelligent people sometimes told themselves things that were not entirely true, that the window had closed, that there was nothing to be done, that the settlement had been signed and notarized, and the marriage was legally concluded, and she should direct her energy forward. She had believed herself for almost 3 years. Now she was sitting at her kitchen table with 47 pages of divorce papers, filed 11 days ago, while she was still in this apartment, while she was asking about the lease, and she was looking at her laptop screen, and she was thinking that the window, as it turned out, had opened again, because this time she had read the papers before she signed them, and what she found in the papers, specifically on page 31, in the section addressing the division of marital assets, was the same architecture she had seen on that projector screen in the Beijing conference room. The same structure. Different companies, different registry dates, but the same logic. A marital estate declared at 1.2 million yuan, which was almost insultingly low, structured around the apartment, the car, and a joint bank account that contained, at the time of filing, 84,000 yuan. The proposed settlement offered her 60% of that declared estate, 720,000 yuan. Which would have sounded, to someone who had not spent the last 3 years learning exactly what to look for, like a reasonable and even somewhat generous offer. Shen Yue drank the rest of her coffee. She opened a new document on her laptop. She began to type. She typed for 3 hours without stopping. She was not crying. She was not sitting on the floor. She was constructing, in the careful, sequential language of someone who understood how evidence was organized and presented, a preliminary asset map. Every company she could find in the public registry that had been incorporated by anyone connected to Lin Hao in the last 4 years, cross-referenced with the dates of transactions she could pull from their joint account statements, which she had downloaded and saved to an encrypted drive the previous year. Not because she had planned this, but because she was an attorney, and she saved documentation the way other people saved photographs. By 2 in the morning, she had a document that was 11 pages long. She saved it under a file name that was a string of numbers, the date of their wedding, reversed, and she closed the laptop and sat in the silence of the apartment for a moment. The fireworks had stopped. The city outside was the post-celebration city, the slightly deflated version, the one that smelled faintly of smoke and cold concrete. She thought about Jiang Chun's hand over hers on the stone porch in Suzhou. She thought about the way Lin Hao had looked at her across the dinner table 9 days ago when she had asked about the lease, and how he had said, "We'll figure it out," and how she had believed him because she was tired and not paying attention, and because she had forgotten, temporarily, the first and most important rule she had learned in 11 years of practicing law. People told you what they wanted you to think, not what they were thinking. She thought about the 47 pages in the manila envelope, and the declared estate of 1.2 million yuan, and the settlement of 720,000 that had been designed precisely to feel like winning. She went to bed. She set an alarm for 6:30. She slept without difficulty. In the morning she made calls. The first call was to Fang Rui, who was not only her colleague, but the finest asset-tracing forensic accountant she had personally ever worked with, and who owed her, specifically, a favor that had been outstanding for 2 years, and that they had both understood would eventually be called in. "I need a full trace," Shen Yue said without preamble when Fang Rui answered on the second ring. "Corporate registry, beneficial ownership, transaction mapping. The subject is Lin Hao, born 1983, registered address in Chaoyang. I have preliminary documentation." There was a brief pause. Then Fang Rui said, "Is this personal or professional?" "It will be professionally handled," Shen Yue said, which was not quite an answer, and they both understood that. "Send me what you have," Fang Rui said. "I'll call you by Thursday." The second call was to a family law attorney named Wei Jiaming, who practiced at a firm across the city, and who had, in the preceding decade, established a reputation for being extraordinarily effective in high-asset divorce proceedings, specifically those involving the deliberate concealment of marital property. Shen Yue had referred 3 clients to him in the past 4 years. She had never expected to be a client herself. She dialed his number from memory. "I have a situation," she said when he answered. "I want to retain you. The papers were filed 11 days ago. I haven't responded yet." "Good," Wei Jiaming said. "Don't respond until we meet. When can you come in?" "Tomorrow morning." "I'll be here at 8. She hung up. She made more coffee. She looked at the manila envelope on the table, which she had not moved, and which she was now thinking of not as a threat, but as evidence, specifically as a document that had been filed by someone who had been confident she would not know what to look for and would not have the resources to look. That confidence, she had decided, was the first mistake. The second mistake was related to something she had found on page 12 of the divorce petition, in the section where Lin Hao's attorney, a mid-tier firm in Sicheng, not the kind of firm you hired if you expected a serious legal fight, had listed the date of what they were calling the irreparable breakdown of the marital relationship. The date they had listed was 14 months ago. Which was interesting, because 14 months ago, Chen Yue had been sitting in a conference room in Beijing looking at a corporate registry search on a projector screen and recognizing a name she should not have recognized. She had said nothing to Lin Hao about what she found that day. She had gone home and eaten dinner and asked about a lease and behaved, to all appearances, as though she had learned nothing. But someone had known she was looking. She turned this over in her mind while she drank her coffee. It was the kind of realization that had texture to it, rough on one side and smooth on the other, uncomfortable to hold for too long. If the stated breakdown date was 14 months ago, and if that date corresponded with the moment she had begun quietly pulling on threads, then either it was a coincidence or Lin Hao had been watching her the way she had been watching him. And they had both spent the last 14 months living in an apartment together and conducting parallel investigations into the same marriage. She found this, if anything, clarifying. It meant he was not sloppy. It meant this had been constructed carefully and over time. It meant that the 47 pages on her kitchen table were not a reaction to anything she had done, but a preemptive move, a filed position, a declared opening, and that whoever had advised him had understood that the best way to limit her options was to move first, to establish the frame of the dispute before she had a chance to set her own parameters. It was, objectively, not a bad strategy. It was also a strategy that only worked if she behaved the way they had anticipated she would behave, which was to say, as a betrayed spouse, not as an attorney. She thought about that distinction for a long time. She showered. She dressed in the clothes she wore when she had an important meeting, a charcoal suit she had bought in Hong Kong, cut precisely, with pockets that were actually functional, which she had always found to be a non-negotiable requirement. She packed a bag with the documents she needed. She looked at the apartment, the kitchen, the window with the city beyond it, the table with the envelope, the hook by the door where Lin Hao's keys used to hang, and she thought about the fact that she had lived here for 4 years and had felt, for most of that time, that she was building something. She picked up her bag and left. Wei Jiaming's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Guomao, which was a different part of the city from where she practiced, but close enough that she had been here before, on professional business, and knew the elevator bank that was faster and the coffee in the lobby that was drinkable. She arrived 7 minutes before 8, ordered coffee, and sat in the waiting area with her bag on her lap and her phone face down on the table beside her. Lin Hao had not called. He had not sent a message. She had checked twice, not because she was waiting for him to call, but because the absence of contact was itself informative. It meant he was either very confident or very nervous, and she wanted to know which. The absence of contact suggested confident. That, too, was clarifying. Wei Jiaming was a short man in his mid-50s, with the kind of reading glasses that spoke of someone who read continuously and with purpose. And he shook her hand with both of his when he came to get her, which she knew from having observed him at professional events was something he only did when he considered a meeting important. "I've been following your work," he said, when they were seated across from each other with her documents laid out between them. "The Kaiming case last year, that was a very clean piece of litigation." "Thank you," she said. "I need it to be cleaner this time." She explained the structure as she understood it. She told him about the 1.2 million declared estate and the proposed settlement and the 11-page preliminary asset map she had constructed the previous night. She told him about the corporate registry searches and the nominee arrangements and the transaction dates that clustered suspiciously around the periods immediately following major increases in Lin Hao's company's revenue. She told him about the breakdown date on page 12 and what she believed it implied. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the documents she had spread across the table. And then he said, "Do you want this to be quiet or loud?" She understood what he meant. In her experience, high-asset divorce proceedings with concealment allegations could go two ways. You could litigate loudly, file discovery motions and subpoenas, and force every transaction into the public record, which was effective but time-consuming and occasionally self-immolating. Or you could be quiet, strategic, targeted, using the threat of loud as leverage rather than the thing itself. "Quiet first," she said. "Loud if necessary." He nodded slowly, like someone confirming something they had already suspected. "Tell me about the relationship between the concealed assets and his company's corporate structure." She told him. Lin Hao ran a technology consultancy that had grown, in the last 5 years, from a mid-size operation into something considerably more substantial. This was not information she had been unaware of. She had watched it grow, had attended company dinners and investor presentations, and had been present at the launch of the Shanghai office 18 months ago. She had understood it as his career. She had not, at the time, thought about it as a marital asset. She had learned to think about it as a marital asset in the 14 months since the conference room in Beijing. Under Chinese matrimonial property law, specifically as interpreted in the post-2011 judicial interpretations, appreciation in value of a business founded during the marriage was, in most circumstances, subject to distribution as marital property. This was a principle that Lin Hao's attorney, from the mid-tier firm in Qicheng, had clearly decided not to address directly in the petition, choosing instead to present a marital estate that was limited to the most visible and obvious joint holdings. This omission was either incompetence or confidence. Shen Yue was betting on confidence. The same confidence she had seen reflected in the centered envelope on the kitchen table, the same assumption that she would not know what she was looking at, that she would feel rather than analyze, that she would sign quickly and take the settlement and call it fair. The company was incorporated in 2017, she told Wei Jiaming. We were married in 2016. Current valuation based on the last funding round is approximately 47 million yuan. He holds 34% of the equity. His co-founder holds 32%, and the remaining 34% is distributed among early investors. Wei Jiaming made a note. His equity stake. His equity stake, she confirmed, is 15.98 million yuan at current valuation. Don't want? If we establish that the company's foundational growth occurred during the marital period and used marital resources, which I can demonstrate through the joint account transactions I have on record, then we have a basis for arguing that a portion of that equity appreciation is marital property subject to equitable distribution. He looked at her over his reading glasses. What portion are you arguing? I'm not arguing a portion yet, she said. I'm gathering the materials to determine what portion is defensible, but I would like to start with a calculation based on the marital period contribution to growth, cross-referenced with the asset transfers that occurred in the 18 months preceding the petition. The hidden transfers. The transfers that are not reflected in the declared estate, she said, which was technically more accurate. He smiled briefly. How did you map those without financial institution records? I have the joint account statements, she said, and I've matched the outflows to incorporated entities using the public registry. For the full picture, I need Fang Rui to work through the nominee layers. She'll have the initial trace by Thursday. Wei Jiaming put his pen down and looked at her for a moment with an expression that she recognized as professional respect. the kind that had an edge of something else in it. Something that she might have called pity in a different context, but that she chose to interpret as acknowledgement. "I want to be direct with you," he said. "Please. This is recoverable. The position they've filed from is not unassailable. It's actually somewhat aggressive given the actual asset picture, which suggests to me that whoever drafted this expected you not to contest it thoroughly. If you contest it thoroughly, the weaknesses in the petition become their problem." He paused. "However, the company equity argument is complex. It will take time, and it will require them to open their books, which they will resist." "I know," she said, "and Lin Hao will have to decide whether he wants to fight this out or settle at a number that reflects the actual estate." "He'll settle," she said. He looked at her. "What makes you confident?" She thought about how to answer this. She thought about Lin Hao, the person she had been married to for 4 years, who she had watched build a company and negotiate contracts and sit across the table from difficult counterparties. She thought about his particular relationship to conflict, which was not one of avoidance but of calculation. He engaged when he believed he would win, and retreated when the calculus changed. "Because the moment we file the company equity argument in the public record," she said, "his investors will see it, his board will see it, the co-founder will see it. And a valuation dispute attached to a divorce proceeding is the kind of thing that makes the next funding round complicated." She paused. "He can't afford for this to go loud. He built the company during our marriage, partially using marital resources, and he knows I can prove it. He will settle rather than let his investors watch a court determine what portion of his equity stake belongs to his ex-wife." Wei Jiaming picked up his pen again. "All right," he said. "Let's talk about what we're filing." The next 2 weeks passed in the particular way that legal proceedings did when they were moving correctly. Not fast, not with visible drama, but with the steady accumulation of material that would eventually become a position so well documented that contesting it would cost more than conceding it. Fang Rui delivered her initial trace on Thursday, as promised. And it was more detailed than Shen Yue had expected, which was saying something because she had expected it to be detailed. The nominee network had 3 layers. The outermost layer was the set of companies registered in Lin Hao's mother's maiden name. This was the thread she had pulled in the Beijing conference room. The middle layer was a set of companies registered in the name of a former university classmate of Lin Hao's, a man who worked in real estate and who appeared, based on the registration dates, to have been recruited as a nominee holder approximately 2 years ago. The innermost layer was more opaque. 2 companies registered in Hainan under names she did not recognize, which Fang Rui flagged with a note. "These are going to require an additional registry query through the Hainan SAMR office. I'll have it by next week." The total value of assets held across the 3 layers, based on Fang Rui's preliminary assessment, was 3.9 million yuan. This was lower than the 4.7 million she had estimated the previous year, but Fang Rui noted that one of the Hainan entities appeared to have disposed of a property in November, and the proceeds were not yet traceable. "Where did the November proceeds go?" Shen Yue asked on the phone, reading through the report. "Unknown," Fang Rui said. "Possibly offshore. I'd need a different kind of help for that." "How different?" "The kind you'd need to authorize through Wei Jiaming," Fang Rui said. Which was her way of indicating that the next step was legally sensitive enough to require formal coverage. "But I can tell you that the timing corresponds to his filing date, which was 11 days ago. If he moved assets in November in anticipation of filing in December, that's pre-filing dissipation," Shen Yue said. "Right," Fang Rui said, "which is a different category than simple concealment. Pre-filing dissipation of marital assets was not merely a factor in equitable distribution. It was, in certain circumstances, a basis for a court to award the non-dissipating spouse a larger share of the remaining estate as compensation for the assets that had been intentionally depleted or moved beyond reach. It was, if she could establish the timing and the intent, one of the most powerful tools available to her in the proceeding. "Get the Hainan records," Shen Yue said, "and get me the November transaction documentation as specifically as you can." She hung up and sat for a moment at her office desk. She was at the firm because she had returned to work on the third day of the new year and had said nothing to any of her colleagues about the divorce petition, because she did not yet want the social reality of it to exist in the spaces where she needed to be functional. She looked out the window at the city, Zeztua, which was returning to its ordinary self after the holiday. She thought about the property in Hainan. She had never known about a property in Hainan, and about the November sale, and about the fact that someone had been very busy in the months before leaving an envelope on a kitchen table. She thought about how much effort it had taken. How many incorporated entities, how many nominee arrangements, how many careful transactions timed to look unremarkable individually. Tapa, how much of that effort had been directed at making her walk away with 6% of what was actually hers. She thought about that for about 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. Wei Jiaming filed their initial response to the divorce petition on the 14th day, the last day before Lin Hao's filing would have received a default timestamp that slightly reduced her response options. The response was what Wei Jiaming called a position statement with teeth. It accepted the reality of the divorce, made no admission about fault or timeline, and addressed the property division in terms that were, on the surface, moderate and professional, and that contained, buried in the appendix, a preliminary inventory of contested marital assets that included the company equity stake, a reference to the nominee-held entities, and a specific allegation of pre-filing dissipation with reference to the November property sale. The response was filed at 4:50 in the afternoon on a Thursday. By 9:30 the following morning, Shen Yue had received 3 missed calls from a number she did not recognize, and a message from Lin Hao that read, "We need to talk, not through the lawyers." She looked at the message for a moment. She had not heard his voice in 16 days. Maiquan. She had not heard from him at all since the envelope on the table, which she had now placed in a document storage box along with the rest of the papers relating to the proceeding. The message was short, and it was, she noted, phrased as a need rather than a request. "We need to talk," rather than "can we talk," which was a small indicator of where his confidence still sat, even after the filing. She typed back, "Everything goes through Wei Jiaming's office." She put her phone face down on her desk and did not look at it again for 2 hours. The missed calls were from the number belonging to Li Shengyan, who was Lin Hao's attorney at the Sicheng firm, Tingtore, and who called Wei Jiaming's office that same afternoon to request what he described as an informal discussion to explore potential settlement parameters. Wei Jiaming relayed this to Shen Yue with the phrasing he used when something was going according to expectation. A certain flatness, almost bored, as though the development were so predictable it required no additional commentary. "He wants to talk," Wei Jiaming said. "I know what he wants," she said. "What's the timeline on the Hainan records?" "Fang Rui says end of next week." "Then we wait until we have the Hainan records before we agree to any discussions." Wei Jiaming was quiet for a beat. "You understand this will cost more, the longer—" "I understand," she said. "Schedule nothing until we have the Hainan records." In the second week of waiting, she did something she had not done in 2 years. She went through the financial records of their marriage, not looking for assets, not constructing an argument, but reading them the way you might read a personal history that you had not known you were living through. The joint account statements, the credit card records, the mortgage payments on the apartment that she had thought of as building equity, and that she now understood had been one of the smaller pieces of a much larger picture that she had not been given access to. She found the transaction she was looking for on a Tuesday afternoon, eating lunch at her desk. It was a transfer, dated October 2019, from their joint account to an account she did not recognize, for an amount of 22,000 yuan. The memo line said, "Professional Services." She had not noticed it at the time. 22,000 was not a trivial amount, but it was not large enough to be alarming in the context of the account activity around it. And at the time, she had been deep in a litigation matter and had not been scrutinizing joint account statements with the attention she was now applying. She pulled the account number from the statement and ran it through the business registry search. It came back as belonging to a firm called Hexen Corporate Advisory, incorporated in 2018, dissolved in 2021. The registered representative was a name she did not recognize. She forwarded the information to Fang Rui with a note. "Can you tell me what Hexen Corporate Advisory actually was?" Fang Rui's response came back the next morning, and it was brief. Hexen Corporate Advisory was a consulting company that provided nominee holding services. It was dissolved following an unrelated investigation in 2021. The individual you're looking at was a professional nominee holder, someone who registers companies in their name on behalf of beneficial owners. Shen Yue read this twice. She had paid, from their joint account, 22,000 yuan for nominee holding services in October 2019. She had not known this was what she was paying for. She had presumably signed off on the transaction as a routine payment, or it had been set up without her direct authorization, which was itself a potential issue. What this meant, practically, was that the nominee network she was tracing had been initially funded, at least in part, through a payment from the joint marital account. This was a significant finding because it meant that the hidden asset structure had been built from the beginning using marital resources, not personal funds that Lin Hao had earned before the marriage, or inherited or kept separate, but the money in the account that belonged to both of them. She sat with this for a moment. Then she called Fang Rui. "Can you establish the chain between the Hexen payment and the specific entities in the nominee structure?" "I can establish it for the first layer entities," Fang Rui said. "The Hainan layer is going to depend on what we get from the registry next week." "Do it," she said. The Hainan registry documents arrived on a Wednesday, and Fang Rui delivered the completed trace report on the Friday morning. Shen Yue cleared her afternoon schedule and read it in her office with the door closed, drinking coffee that had gone slightly cold and making handwritten notes in the margins of her printed copy. The innermost layer of the structure, the two Hainan entities, had been registered in the names of individuals who, Fang Rui confirmed, were professional nominees operating through a service company based in Sanya. The property that had been sold in November was a residential unit in a development outside Sanya, purchased in 2021, sold at a significant appreciation. The sale proceeds, 2.3 million yuan, had been transferred to a bank account held by one of the Hainan entities, and from there, in 5 tranches over 3 days in late November, the funds had been transferred out. Fang Rui's note at the end of that section. "The destination accounts are held at a bank in Macau. I cannot trace beyond that point without mechanisms that are outside what I can provide. However, the timing, 5 tranches over 3 days in late November, with the first tranche dated 18 days before the divorce petition was filed, is, in my professional opinion, consistent with pre-filing asset movement." Shen Yue set down the report. She looked at the window. Outside it was a gray February afternoon. The kind of afternoon that felt like someone had put a filter over the city, everything slightly muted, slightly drained. 2.3 million yuan. Not offshore in some unreachable account for the purpose of the marital estate argument, because she did not need to reach it. She needed to prove it had existed, and that it had been moved in anticipation of the proceeding, and that its absence from the declared estate was not an oversight, but a deliberate act. The documentation she now had, the timing, the 5 tranches, The 18-day window before filing was sufficient to establish that chain. She called Wei Jiaming. "I have the complete picture," she said. "Schedule the discussion." The meeting took place in a neutral conference room at a hotel near the courthouse, a common ground choice that both attorneys had agreed to, a space that belonged to neither party and therefore to both. Wei Jiaming arrived with Shen Yue 3 minutes before the scheduled time. Li Shengnan arrived 4 minutes late with Lin Hao, and Shen Yue looked at her husband across the conference table for the first time in 22 days. He looked, she noted, like someone who had not been sleeping well. There were visible marks under his eyes, and he was wearing a jacket she had not seen before, which she took as an indicator that he had not been back to the apartment since leaving the envelope on the table. His expression when he looked at her was complicated. She recognized in it the specific combination of residual affection and active guilt that she had, in her professional life, observed in many people who had done calculated things to people they did not actually dislike. She found this mildly interesting and moved on. The meeting followed a standard structure for these kinds of discussions: opening statements of position, a review of the contested assets, there's an exchange of proposed settlement ranges. Li Shengnan opened by reiterating the declared estate and the original settlement offer in terms that were carefully professional, and that contained, she noted, a particular confidence that she now recognized as the tail end of an assumption, the assumption that she would come to the table without the full picture. Wei Jiaming waited until Li Shengnan had finished. Then he opened the folder in front of him and slid 3 documents across the table. "We'd like to address the nominee structure first," he said. Li Shengnan looked at the documents. He picked up the first one, the corporate registry chain, showing the connection between the first-layer entities and the Hexen payment from the joint account. And he read it with the care of someone who was trying to determine whether what they were reading was what they thought it was. Then he looked at Lin Hao. Lin Hao was looking at Shen Yue. She looked back at him. Sutur. She kept her expression at the professional setting, the one she used in depositions and hearings and meetings where she needed to communicate that she was completely in control of the information in the room. She held his gaze for approximately 4 seconds, which was long enough to communicate what she needed to communicate. And then she looked back at Wei Jiaming. Because the meeting was not about her looking at Lin Hao, the meeting was about the documents on the table. "We're prepared to provide the complete trace," Wei Jiaming said, "including the documentation of the November Hainan property sale and the subsequent 5-tranche transfer, with specific reference to the 18-day window preceding the petition filing. Our position is that the total marital estate, properly calculated, is approximately 12.4 million yuan, inclusive of the equity stake in the company and the nominee-held asset network. We are also prepared to file a formal pre-filing dissipation allegation with the court, if the parties are unable to reach agreement today." The number, he said, 12.4 million, landed in the room with the particular weight of a number that was not being challenged, because challenging it would require the other party to demonstrate that their own position was accurate. And they had just been shown, in 3 documents, that their own position was not going to survive scrutiny. Li Shengnan said, "We'd need to review these materials before—" "Of course," Wei Jiaming said. "We're happy to reconvene on whatever timeline is appropriate." He paused professionally. "However, I should note that our position on the company equity argument is well developed, and we are confident in the legal basis. We would prefer to resolve this in the next 2 weeks before we move to formal discovery, given that formal discovery in the company equity matter would require your client to open his corporate records, which may have implications for his upcoming—" Wei Jiaming paused, as though consulting a note. "Series B discussion. I believe that's scheduled for the spring." The spring funding round. She had not told Wei Jiaming about the funding round. She had not needed to, because Fang Rui's trace had included a note about the company's publicly announced growth plans, And Wei Jiaming had made the inference himself, which was why she had hired him. Li Shengnan looked at his client again. Lin Hao had stopped looking at Shen Yue. He was looking at the table, specifically at the 3 documents, and she could see in the slight tension around his jaw the moment when the calculation changed, when he stopped assessing the position he was in and started calculating the cost of defending it against the cost of conceding. "We'll review the materials," Li Shengnan said, "and we'll be in touch by end of week." The meeting ended without drama. Wei Jiaming and Shen Yue walked to the elevator bank without discussing what had just happened, which was their professional understanding. You processed the meeting privately and exchanged assessments later, not in hallways where the opposing party might still be present. In the elevator, Wei Jiaming said, "End of week." "Yes," she said. "So, he'll want to settle before we file the dissipation allegation. The funding round is the leverage." "I know," she said. The doors opened on the lobby level. She walked out into the February cold and stood on the pavement outside the hotel for a moment, breathing in the cold, which was a different kind of cold from the cold she had walked into 22 days ago when she came home to an apartment with a loose light bulb and a manila envelope. This cold felt, if anything, clarifying. She had 40 minutes before she needed to be back at the firm for a 3 o'clock call. She walked, because walking was the thing she did when she needed to think in the particular way that motion facilitated. Not the circular thinking that happened at a desk, but the linear thinking that happened when the body was moving forward and the mind tracked alongside it. She thought about the numbers. The complete marital estate of $12.4 million. The equity stake at $15.98 million current valuation, of which she was arguing a portion as marital property. Wei Jiaming had settled on 35% as a defensible claim, given the marital period contribution and resource use, which put it at approximately $5.59 million from the equity alone. Add the nominee-held assets of $3.9 million at the traced value, plus the pre-filing dissipation of $2.3 million, plus the original declared estate of $1.2 million. The original settlement offer had been 720,000 yuan. She was now arguing for something in the range of 6 to 7 million, depending on how the equity portion was calculated and whether the dissipation allegation was factored in as a separate compensation element or incorporated into the overall distribution. This was, she thought, the appropriate number. Not punitive, not inflated. The appropriate number, the one that reflected what had actually been built with her presence and her silence and her resources and her energy. Oh, and in 4 years of a marriage that had been, apparently, a platform for other things. She was not angry about this, or at least she was not angry in the way that the original calculation had assumed she would be. The hot, destabilizing anger that made people sign quickly and regret slowly. She was something colder. She was precise. Li Shengnan called Wei Jiaming on Thursday, not Friday, which was itself a signal. The call lasted 22 minutes. Though Wei Jiaming summarized it to her in 4 sentences, Lin Hao was prepared to negotiate a revised settlement. He was not accepting the 12.4 million estimate, but he was prepared to discuss a number in a range that he characterized as significantly revised. He wanted the dissipation allegation removed as a condition of settlement. He did not want the company equity argument to proceed to formal discovery. "He's negotiating from a real position now," Wei Jiaming said. "The first offer was theater." "I know," she said. "What do we respond?" "We respond," Wei Jiaming said, "by telling them we're willing to discuss settlement, but the dissipation allegation is not a bargaining chip. It stays on the table as a court filing option until we've reached a number we consider accurate. That keeps it as leverage without us appearing inflexible." "And the company equity argument?" "We don't agree to remove it from consideration. We agree to take note of the complexity and consider a more expedient resolution." That's our opening. She thought about it. Make the call, she said. The negotiation took 3 weeks. She did not participate in most of it directly. That was Wei Jiaming's work, which she trusted him to do. She returned to her life, which meant work, and the apartment, and the particular flatness of a domestic space in which one fewer person was present. She packed Lin Hao's remaining belongings into boxes, methodically, without ceremony, and arranged for them to be collected. She reset the login credentials on the household accounts. She notified her bank about the change in marital status on her personal account, which was a technical step, but which felt, each time she dealt with one of these administrative realities, like a small incremental clarification. She saw Jiang Chen twice during those 3 weeks. The first time was a lunch, in a place near her office. His suggestion, her acceptance, a meal that lasted 2 hours, and during which she told him nothing specific about the proceedings, and he asked nothing specific, though she understood from the way he asked about her general situation that he was aware something was shifting. He was the same as he had been on the stone porch in Suzhou, careful, present, not performing. She found this, as she had always found it, both comfortable and slightly sad, in the way that things that might have been different were always slightly sad. The second time was an evening walk, his idea, along the river on a night that was cold enough to require moving. He did not hold her hand. He walked beside her, and they talked about his work, which was architecture, and about a project he was developing in a coastal city, and she found herself listening in the genuine way, the way that was not politeness but actual interest, and thinking peripherally about the fact that she was 41 years old and had spent 4 of those years in a marriage that had been, among other things, an expensive error. "You seem like you're working through something," he said at one point, without pressuring her to describe what it was. "I am," she said. "Is it going well?" She considered this. "It's going correctly," she said, "which is not always the same thing." He looked at her sidelong, with the expression she remembered from when they were 22, and she had said something he was trying to decode. "Is there something I can—" "Not yet," she said, "but maybe at some point." He nodded, which was the right response, and they kept walking. The settlement was reached on a Tuesday. Wei Jiaming called her at 2:17 in the afternoon. The final number was 5.4 million yuan. This included a cash payment of 2.1 million from the nominee-held asset network, the pre-filing dissipation amount of 2.3 million reflected in a separate cash component, a revised property settlement for the apartment at current market value rather than the original lease transfer arrangement, and a payment of 1 million yuan that was technically described as additional property settlement, but that both parties understood as the price of removing the company equity argument from the filed record before it could be attached to the public court documentation that Lin Hao's investors would eventually see. No formal dissipation allegation was ever filed. No formal discovery into the company equity was ever initiated. The settlement was reached privately, reflected in a consent order, and the divorce proceeding was concluded. The legal fees she had incurred, Wei Jiaming's retainer, Fang Rui's forensic accounting work, the administrative costs of the proceeding, came to approximately 280,000 yuan. She considered this figure against the original settlement offer of 720,000 yuan, and then against the final settlement of 5.4 million yuan, and she noted, with the part of her mind that was permanently in motion calculating efficiency and return, that the net recovery differential was 4.4 million yuan. She was a corporate attorney. She understood the concept of return on investment. The afternoon the consent order was finalized, she left the firm at 6 o'clock, unusually early for her, and went home to the apartment, which was legally hers now in a more complete sense than it had been when the original settlement had simply transferred the lease. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the place where the manila envelope had been. 22 days after the new year, when she had come home from Suzhou with her overnight bag and her coat still buttoned to the throat. The table was clean. She drank the coffee. She thought about the weeks behind her. And then she stopped thinking about the weeks behind her, because the weeks behind her were concluded, and the documentation was filed, and the consent order was signed, and there was nothing in the weeks behind her that required any further attention. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Jiang Chen. It said, "That project in the coastal city. Tell me more about it." His reply came back while she was rinsing her coffee cup. "Dinner on Thursday," he said. "Aren't one. I'll bring the plans." She put the phone down on the counter and looked out the kitchen window at the city, which was fully into the new year now. The celebrations completely finished, the ordinary momentum of the remaining months already established. February. The city was cold and moving and completely indifferent to what had just been resolved in a hotel conference room and a series of phone calls and a 3-week negotiation that had converted a 720,000 yuan settlement into 5.4 million. She went to her desk and opened her laptop. There was a new client file waiting for her to review. A referral from a colleague, a woman whose situation bore, in its outlines, a specific familiarity. Asset-heavy marriage. Declared estate that did not reflect the visible wealth. A husband with a corporate structure that was somewhat more complex than it needed to be. Shen Yue opened the file. She began to read. Outside, the city moved through the cold February evening without comment. Somewhere in it, Lin Hao was making his own calculations, recalibrating, starting the next phase of the construction he was always conducting, adjusting for the variable she had turned out to be. Somewhere in it. But Jiang Chen was probably in his studio with drafting tools and elevation models, thinking about a coastal project and Thursday's dinner. Somewhere in it, Fang Rui was almost certainly working on something that would, at some point, require her to be called. Shen Yue read the new client file. She reached for a pen. In the margin of the first page, she wrote a single question, the first of what would be several questions, the kind that looked small but pointed toward things that were large. Then she started the second page,